Sir.
This
Good morning,
meeting
sir.
is being recorded.
Good morning.
Yeah, guys, good morning. Good morning to all of you. Let's start with the session. Yeah. Basically, yesterday we discussed more theoretically. Right? We discussed more theoretically about the Springboot. So basically, what are the issues that we discussed in the last class? Okay. So now today we'll discuss some more things about Springboot. We will discuss about some more new things about the Springboot in the session for today. Okay, guys. See, what are the advantages of Springboot? I can tell you that there is a lot of difference you are going to find if you are already a Spring programmer. So earlier you have created some Spring applications. And when you are creating those Spring applications using Spring Boot, you are going to find what? A lot of differences you are going to find. So one thing, when you are in Spring framework, I said already, there are a lot of configurations things required. Major things that problems that we are facing in the Spring is, one is about configurations part, and the second one is the dependencies management. Okay, one is a configurations part and second one is a dependencies management. These are the two things, the issues we are facing in the Spring while developing applications. Now, when we talk about the Spring Boot features, guys, I'll tell you one by one. Okay. The one feature which I can tell you is always, guys, in Spring Boot, configuration is very less, almost zero configuration. And sometimes you need to customize the configuration. So at that time, you are writing little bit configuration. So basically what happens in Spring Boot is, you no need of writing any configuration by yourself. You no need of writing any configurations by yourself. Okay, so almost all the configurations are zero. Very less configuration, very less or zero configuration, guys. How? Just it's a point. Let's talk about how it is. So I will explain you this part. See, I want to tell you that suppose we are creating a Spring MVC application, a web application we are creating using Spring Web MVC framework. We are creating a Spring web application. You know, you are supposed to write, first you need to configure all your Spring beans. Okay. If you have an idea, then I'm talking about handler mapping. Okay. And you know, you are supposed to configure something like view resolver. Okay. Multi-part resolvers. And suppose if you have any JSON type of responses, then Jackson JSON APIs, that is called message converters. Okay. And suppose if you have a database connectivity, for example, then you need to configure the data source. And suppose if you are some entity manager factory, and so on, I can start writing like this for many. so on. So, I said the configuration only takes more time. But now in Spring Boot, it is very less configuration or zero configuration. So no need of writing much configuration in Spring Boot. Because I'll tell you the reason. Almost all the configuration which is required for the application we are developing will be done by Spring Boot itself. Spring Boot has that capability. Because in Spring Boot, we are going to find some auto configure module exists in Spring Boot. Spring Boot auto configure, there is a module. And that Spring Boot auto configure module will automatically configures all the required Spring beans in the Spring application context. That is called Spring container. Okay. So that is the reason why very less configurations. If you want to customize some configurations, then you can just write the configuration. Or if any one or two additional configurations required, so they only you are going to write. But almost all the configurations will be done by Spring Boot only. So here you no need to think of as a developer much configurations here. That is a very important advantage in Spring Boot. So now you can happily concentrate on what you can just concentrate on your application development rather than what providing the configuration for the application. So that is the first thing, guys. So no need of writing all these configuration. So who will write all these configurations? That is all will be automatically done by Spring Boot. Spring Boot automatically configures all the beans which are required for this particular type of applications. I'll tell you how does Spring Boot knows that these are all configurations required in my project or in your project. We are going to come into that next point. Second advantage, guys, I want to tell you, everyone, just see, as I said already yesterday, majorly two things. There are two major issues with the application development using Spring Framework. Issue number one is configurations part. Number two, adding the dependencies. Okay. So what happened in Spring Boot? Spring Boot has provided a new type of dependencies. They are called Spring Boot starters. See, there are what happened in Spring Boot. So Spring Boot has provided multiple starters. They are also called starter dependencies. Okay. So what every starter is also a library, a jar file, but which is internally a group of compatible versions of the related jar files. So one starter, if you take, one starter is nothing but one jar file in Spring. Okay. In Spring Boot, one starter is nothing but one Spring Boot related jar file, but that is internally it has a group of related jar files with a compatible versions for a particular Spring feature. I will write all these points to you so that you will come to know more in detail. Okay. So basically what I'm saying, a starter is nothing but it is also one jar file only. It is one library we can call. It's a Spring Boot jar file. But it is internally, it has a group of related jar files with the compatible versions for a particular Spring feature. So earlier what happened yesterday, I told you that developers are spending more time on the, identifying what are the, what we can say, the compatible versions of the dependencies. If the two dependencies means the two jar files are incompatible dependencies, then, the application gets runtime exceptions. But in Spring Boot, we don't have that issue. And first of all, the developers are no need to spend much effort and time in identifying the compatible versions of the dependencies. Hope you guys have understood about the point what I'm trying to say. But now what happened in Spring Boot is, guys, in Spring Boot, we have a new type of jar files called starters. A starter is nothing but it is a jar file. But it is internally, okay, so multiple jar files, related jar files with the compatible versions are aggregated and given as a one starter in Spring Boot for a particular feature. For example, if I want to create a, for example, web application. So there is a starter given called a Spring Boot starter web. So for example, here I'm writing a point to understand about what starter is. Okay, just observe it, guys. Guys, just give me a second. I'll continue. Just 1 second. Yes, guys, let's continue. So I want to tell you just a point I want to write here is what, what is starters? See, starters are Spring Boot libraries. I'll show you. Are Spring Boot libraries, nothing but jar files. Okay. Which internally has multiple or a group of, which internally has a group of libraries, nothing but jar files, a group of jars with a compatible versions for a particular feature. Okay, particular feature. Got my point? So for a particular Spring feature, otherwise better word I'll write, for a particular Spring feature. This is actually called as what? A starter. So starters are Spring Boot libraries, which are also called jar files, which internally has a group of jars with compatible versions of a particular feature. Earlier, what happened? Suppose if you are a Spring application developer, you are responsible. For example, you want to use a Spring Web MVC version 4, then you are required to find out all the third-party libraries which are compatible with the Spring version 4 for this particular Spring feature. But now you don't have that problem because Spring Boot only provided a new type of dependencies. They are called Spring Boot starters. And each starter is an aggregate of a group of jars with compatible versions for a particular Spring feature. So guys, everyone, generally what happens in Spring, every Spring Boot starter is going to start with a word called Spring-Boot-starter. Spring-Boot-starter, then followed by something. So I'm writing simply asterisk. I'll tell you what we fill in this asterisk. So every Spring Boot starter starts with like this Spring Boot starter, then followed by one asterisk. I mean, here we should start writing, for example, Spring Boot starter Aop or Spring Boot starter web. Okay. These are all the dependencies, nothing but these are all the jars, libraries, which are given by Spring Boot. Spring Boot starter Aop, Spring Boot starter web, Spring Boot starter JDBC, Spring Boot starter data JPA. Okay, like this, you will be finding many Spring Boot starter tests. I'll show you a list of the Spring Boot starters. All the Spring Boot starters will start with this word Spring-Boot-starter. What is starter? It is also a jar file. It is a Springboot jar file, a library, but it is internally, it has a group of third-party jars with the compatible versions. So basically what, for example, if I say Springboot Starter Web, internet, it has a Spring Web MVC, Spring Context, okay, Tomcat, Jackson Data Bind API. Get my point clearly, guys. Validation. So multiple, they are all called what? The internally, these are all the different libraries with the compatible versions. They are all aggregated and given as a Springboot Starter Web for the developer. So if I add this dependency in my to my project file, pom.xml file, if I add this dependency to my project in the pom.xml file, so all these libraries are added to my project. So I don't need to worry about their versions. I don't need to worry about whether they're compatible versions or not. So that is an advantage. This is called a new concept we got in Springboot. This is a main important concept. That's called Springboot starters. Various starters are there. Each starter starts with a Springboot starter followed by something. Everyone, guys, everyone try to understand. I think you got my point clearly. Guys, okay na? Springboot starter web is a dependency. Springboot starter JDBC. Okay, Springboot starter JPA, data JPA, something like that. So all Springboot starters will start with Spring-boot-starter. That's the second important feature of the Springboot. So basically, I want to write a point like this. Okay, so Springboot has provided various starters, okay, for each Spring feature, or provided starters for each Spring feature. That's better. Provided starters for each Spring feature. And they start with Spring hyphen, okay, boot hyphen starter, clear, hyphen asterisk. So for example, there are many. I'm going to open and I'll show you. For example, Spring hyphen boot hyphen starter hyphen web, like this. What are all these? Whatever I'm writing here, these are all dependencies. These are all what? Jar files, okay. Springboot starter AOP, okay. Spring boot starter, clear. Springboot starter web, Springboot starter AOP, Springboot starter JDBC, clear. Springboot starter test, and I'm not writing all, etc. A list I'll show you. When you open the Google and type Springboot starters, list of Springboot starters, then you will be finding a lot of starters. Springboot starter validation, like that we will be having different starters, and based on our application's requirement, we are just going to add that one starter as a dependency. Mostly we use a Springboot starter web dependency because we are creating all web applications and enterprise applications. This is a second advantage, guys. I want to continue now. Okay, so let's start with the next one. See, I would like to show you some list of starters first. Springboot starters list. So you'll be finding a lot of Springboot starters in the reference documentation. You have many Springboot starters. So I will show you the list of the Springboot starters somewhere. you will be finding all the list of the Spring Boot starters. Maybe somewhere in the page you will find
So,
the reference documentation.
So hi Shekhar. My question is: suppose if I want to communicate with the database by using perform data JPA, then we need to add Springboot starter data JPA, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so
Correct.
it's like simply it's a dependency, we can say, right?
That's it. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys. Okay, here I opened a list here. You can see the following application starters are provided by Spring Boot under the group org.springframework.boot. As you know that when you are adding dependencies, we have a group ID, artifact ID. And of course, there is a version also we provide for the particular artifact. So here the group is org.springframework.boot. I will tell you how do you write. So now this is the starters you can see. This is a Spring Boot starter without any hyphen next one, which means you are just creating a core application. It's a core starter, which is including auto configuration support, logging, and YAML support. I'll tell you what YAML file is. Spring Boot starter active MQ, AMQP, AOP, Spring Boot starter batch, Spring Boot starter cache, Spring Boot starter data Cassandra, mostly the data science applications, AI applications use Cassandra as a NoSQL database, like MongoDB. Couchbase is also one more NoSQL database. You can see here Spring Boot starter data JDBC, data JPA, LDAP, MongoDB, and so on, guys. Okay, you can see the list later. So there are many Spring Boot starter JSON, security, Spring Boot starter security, which is an important one. For Spring security, we add this dependency. For reactive programming, it is Webflux, validations, Timeleaf. And this is the most important one, Spring Boot starter web. This is actually used for building web, including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. Uses Tomcat as a default embedded container. We are going to look into that. So this is what I'm trying to tell you, all of you guys. Basically, you can find all these listed somewhere. You can just look into. Okay, na? Right. So how do we add this dependency in our project is like this.
Shekhar, I have one question here. Maybe this is a little advanced. Like suppose when we in the starter Spring Boot starter project, we are by default it will be coming as a logback logger configuration, right?
Yes.
Suppose if I want to have in any other logger which is available third
Log4j, you can add SLO4j, Log4j.
If I exclude in the starter project, will it be affected to all the other starter projects, since like all the logger configuration is available for web and all other starter projects as well, the logging.
Yeah.
So if I block or if I exclude the logger for starter, then will it be applied to all, or do we need to specifically tell to all other dependencies as well?
When we write any exclusion tag for a particular dependency, we are excluding that particular. We are telling the Maven that simply don't download this particular internal dependency for that particular one only.
Okay.
So it's not going to be, it's not going to be for all.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's just only for that particular from that particular dependency. We are telling that you just don't include this, exclude it.
Okay, then in that case, we need to mention for all the dependencies.
Exclusion tag is required in the dependency. Suppose if you don't want that internal dependency, if you want to tell the Maven that don't include that, then we need to write exclusion for the dependency.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So nice. So there is a dependency. Basically, just I want to tell you that dependency tag has a group ID, correct? So we used to write like this, guys. org.springframework.boot is the group ID. This is how we write. Next one is what? Artifact ID. So artifact ID, just we are going to Spring Boot starter, for example, web. If I'm only stopping with a starter without writing any web or AOP or something like that, which means that I'm creating a Spring core application, because initially when we start our Spring Boot projects, we are just going to create a simple Spring core applications. So at that time we use only Spring Boot starter, that's all. But later on, when we are going to start with integrating with JDBC, creating DAO layer with JDBC and all, we use to write Spring Boot starter JDBC, Spring Boot starter web, like that we are going to write. Okay. So generally when we write the dependency, version tag we don't include. I'll tell you why version tag we don't include. There is a parent tag. I'll tell you what is parent tag. So the parent version is inherited to all the dependencies. This is called Springboard starter web dependency. I mean, this is a way how we can add the dependency. That's what I want to say. Not only web or any other dependency, but we use. So if you add one like this, it is used for creating both MVC applications and also RESTful web services. And also it includes a Tomcat server. So we have another feature in Springboard, and that is actually what, called as embedded server. So application runs itself with the support of a server. Earlierly, what we need to deploy the WAR file. What we do, we deploy the WAR file to the server. First, we create a WAR file for the project by executing maven install or maven package goal. We create a WAR file and we deploy that WAR file to the server. Correct? That's what earlier we used to do. Means what, our application needs a server support to execute it, because it's a web application where a web container support is required. But now what happens? Application runs itself with the support of a server. Means we no need to deploy, no deployment of the WAR files required. Absolutely. Simply a Spring Boot application, just we are going to run it like a normal Java application. With a Java command we can run. Java with a -jar option. We can run the application. Right? Otherwise, we can also create a Docker container and we can run the Docker container. Docker image we can create and we can run it as a Docker container. All the things I'll explain you. Okay, a lot of things this session will teach you. Hope if you guys are regularly attending, if you are joined to my session, and I'm sure that I will provide you my level best to provide the content and the subject as much as I can. Okay, embedded server. And one thing, there are 3 servers can be embedded. Embedded server advantage is application runs by itself. Earlier, okay, no deployment of WAR files. So no deployment of WAR files. Applications run by themselves. Applications runs by itself. By itself, with the support of embedded server. And of course, there are 3 embedded servers supported. The supported embedded servers are 3. Right now in Springboard, there are 3 embedded support servers. The support embedded servers are Tomcat, then Jetty, and Undertow. TOW. So by default, Tomcat is embedded. Suppose if you want to run in other server like a Jetty or Undertow, what you are supposed to do is you are just going to exclude Jetty, exclude Tomcat and include the dependency for Jetty or Undertow. So in programming, the first application, when we create a web application, then I will show you using embedded Tomcat or excluding embedded Tomcat and including Jetty as an embedded server or Undertow as an embedded server. Okay, now? So this is what called as, guys, embedded server. We are discussing all the Spring Boot features. Very important thing is very less or zero configuration. Almost all the configurations are done by Spring Boot only. But the question raised here, how does the Spring Boot knows about what are the configurations required for your application? How it knows? Actually, what we are adding a starter, correct? Are you getting my point, guys? Everybody?
Yes, sir.
The point is, how does a Spring Boot knows about it? I'll tell you. See, we are adding, for example, Spring Boot starter web dependency, which is an aggregate form of internally a group of third-party libraries, a group of jars or third-party libraries. Correct? So what can I do now? Whenever I add some particular starter file, I mean, whenever I add a starter dependency, you know, at the runtime, all those group of jar files are added to the class path. They are all going to become available to the application class path at execution, right? So what happens based on the jars available in the class path? Based on the jars that are available in the application class path, then the Spring Boot will identify what type of application that you are creating and what are the default configurations required for it. And that's the reason why Spring Boot is called opinionated framework. It has a default opinion. It has an opinion for a default configurations required for the type of the project. Suppose I'm adding Spring Boot starter web dependency, which means it is aggregate form of internally multiple jar files, Spring MVC, that's Spring Web MVC, and of course, Spring Web MVC has Spring context also, then Jackson Databind API, okay, and Snake YAML library, like the different jar files are there internally. That is an aggregate form of multiple jar files. Based on the jars available in the application class path, Spring Boot has an opinion that this application is for this type. So then it will automatically perform the default configurations required for creating this type of application. So basic simple answer is what now? Based on the jars that are available in application class path, Spring Boot comes to know what configurations are needed. And Spring Boot has an auto configure module, and that auto configure module has a group of auto configuration classes. And those auto configuration classes are invoked and they register the beans in the Spring container. I'll give all this description, whatever. This is what you need to say. Generally, we used to ask, okay, we used to ask this type of questions. How does Spring Boot know that what dependencies and what configurations are required for your project? Okay, many of the people, some people may express their view, but many of the people doesn't have a clarity on that. So basically, I just want to open because it's a session where you need to learn something additional. I want to make your head as somewhat more weighted. See here. There is something called, guys, Spring Boot Auto Configure. Auto Configure is a module. Spring Boot Auto Configure module is there. Okay, there is something called Spring Boot Auto Configure module. There are a group of auto configuration classes. Otherwise, okay, I need, if I want to read this entire description, will take more time. Simply, I'll say Spring Boot Auto Configure classes or auto configuration classes. Now I can open the document, current document, auto configuration classes in Spring Boot. So now you can see the following are the auto configuration classes from the Spring Boot Auto Configure module. You can see there are many auto configuration classes and their related links to the document. You can see, guys, there are so many auto configuration classes are provided by Spring Boot. But in this, whatever I want to tell you, one auto configuration class is Aop Auto Configuration. This is what you can understand. Batch auto configuration, cache auto configuration. And I'll show you. You can see this may be helpful to you, but means you can understand. What you can understand is data source auto configuration, which automatically configures the data source object, because you all people know about data source. Dispatcher select auto configuration, correct? It is also, you know, if you know transaction manager, you can see transaction man, data source transaction manager auto configuration. Like this, a Spring Boot has many auto configuration classes. Even you can find out, I think you people know about JDBC template auto configuration. JDBC template auto configuration. So we no need to configure JMS auto configuration. JNDA data source auto configuration for connection pooling. Correct. So basically, these are all the different, there are many. These are all the different auto configuration classes that Spring Boot has provided in a module called Spring Boot Auto Configure module. So what happens now, based on the jars that are available in the application class path, then what happens, guys? Spring Boot is going to invoke that particular respect to auto configuration classes. And those auto configuration classes are going to configure, I mean, are going to register that related bean in the Spring container. For example, data source auto configuration, it will register a data source object. JDBC template auto configuration class, it will register JDBC template object in the Spring container. That's what I'm trying to tell you. These are all the different auto configuration classes. Correct? So that is the answer for the question, like how does a Spring Boot knows about what are the beans required to configure in Spring container or to be added to the Spring container. So this is all depends on the starters. So you got very less or zero configuration, Spring Boot starters, and we have embedded server here, no need of deployment. Correct? No configurations required, very less or zero configuration required. And I can tell you that there is something called in Spring Boot, there is a concept called as actuator module. Okay, basically this actuator module will provide the some URLs to access the health and metrics of the application. So that actuator module we will see at the very end. So provides URLs to access health and metrics. Application metrics we call, we'll discuss that, okay, separately. Provides URLs to access the health and metrics of application. Okay, right. So as we discussed, now coming to the point, guys. And we have something called as profiles, Spring Boot profiles, which helps to easily migrate application from one environment to the other environment. I said yesterday, for example, we have a dev environment and we have a test environment and we have a production environment, UAT environment. Okay. So basically what happens, guys, application properties are different from the one environment to the other environment, correct? So application properties are also need to be changed. Every time if you open the application to do some changes to configuration, it is definitely going to be error prone, because you may some place you might have changed properly and in some other place you might not change it properly. So you will be getting some kind of issues. So we have a concept called what is profiles. So these profiles makes to this profiles support makes to okay switch applications from one environment to the other environment. Okay, na? From one environment to the other environment. From one environment to the another easily. Okay, guys. So these are the Springboot features what you got. Okay, what are the two major features of the Springboot, guys? See, sometimes in production, what happens? We also need external server support. So many times we use embedded server, but sometimes we also need external server. Clear? So that is also possible. I mean, we have by default embedded server. Suppose if you want to explicitly deploy a WAR file of your Springboot project into WebLogic server or JBoss server, if you want to take some external server support for production, that is also possible. You can exclude the Tomcat and so that you can deploy the WAR file to any other server. By default, it has embedded Tomcat server. Embedded servers are supported. If you want to deploy the application as a WAR file onto some other external servers, that is also possible. You see, guys, yesterday we have opened. Look at this. I will explain you. Sorry, spring.io is a website. So as you can see, in Spring Boot, as I said already, most of the Spring Boot applications need minimal Spring configuration, almost zero. You can create all types of applications using Spring Boot, standalone Spring applications. Even though it is a web application, but still it is going to look like a standalone application. Embedded Tomcat, Jetty or Undertow. It will provide opinionated starter dependencies to simplify your build configuration. Automatically configure Spring and third-party libraries. Metrics and health checks are supported. No code generation, no requirement for XML configurations. Almost all those points I have covered, but in our way, so that you will understand it in an easy manner. That is what I did here, correct? You got my point, guys. We have a very less or zero configuration, Springboard starters, and we have embedded server, we have actuator module, and we have the profiles. Okay. Now I want to tell all of you guys is that, do remember, every Spring Boot application contains a Java class with a main method. Okay, before I start with annotations, I'll give you some idea. But first of all, I would like to tell you that what every Spring Boot application contains a Java class with a main method. So every Spring Boot application will just run like a standalone application, even though it is a production ready application, but still it runs like a standalone application. So let's see what are the requirements. Okay, I will tell you one thing, guys. If you are working with the Spring, something like STS IDE, okay, Spring tool suite is the IDE. We can also work on any other IDE. We have directly an option for creating the Spring Boot projects called Spring Starter project option in STS IDE. Okay. But if you are using other IDE, not STS, say for example, I want to use just Eclipse only, not STS, for example. So creating the skeleton of a Spring Boot project. Initially, we can start by generating the skeleton of the project. And first we download it as a zip file. Then we will just extract the zip file, correct? I'm going to show you that. For creating Springboot projects, Spring team has provided one tool called Spring Initializer. I'll open the tool. So how we kickstart the applications development is with the help of this tool. Spring Initializer is a web tool. It is a web tool. Okay, to kickstart the project development, Spring Boot application development. To kickstart the application development. Let's open this. It is a web tool, guys. Means we can access it from browser. If you are working with IDE like STS, it is also going to use this Spring Initializer tool internally to kickstart the application development, to create the project structure. So, for example, I will like to open. There is a URL. I'll tell you the URL. The URL to access this is start.spring.io is a URL. Let's observe it. Let's open the start.spring.io. Now this is what called a Spring Initializer. It is one tool. And this is actually for generating the skeleton of the project. Here we need to choose, guys. Project Maven project or Gradle, because we must need a build tool, either Maven or Gradle. Without that, we cannot be able to create any Springboard projects. What are the minimum requirements? Java 8 version is required. Minimum version of Java is 8 for Springboot. Second, build tool is compulsory. Third, Spring Framework version 5 will be used, 5.x. So if you look at this, so Spring 5 is a minimum version in Spring Boot. Build tool is compulsory. Java minimum version 8 is required. So here we are going to choose the project. Which type of project we are creating? Maven project. Language Java. We can also create the Spring Boot projects using other languages like a Kotlin or Groovy. So we choose project type Maven. We also choose Gradle, but initially with Maven. Language Java. Then Spring Boot versions. Current version 2.6.4. 2.6.4 is the current version in Spring Boot. These are all the upcoming versions. They are all snapshots, not releases. Means they are not finalized. 2.6.4 is the current version, by default selected here. We can choose any other version. For example, I want 2.5. Then I can choose it. Then you need to provide project metadata here. What is the group ID? What is the artifact name you want? What is the name that you want to give for your project? And what's the description that you want to provide for your project? What's the package name, base package name? And you want to package it into a jar file or var file. Spring Boot applications can be packaged to either jar or vars. So I want to package my application to jar file. Then Java version, whether you want to use 8 or 11 or 17, you are going to select all these things. Then here we go to add dependency section. And here we click on add dependency. For example, I want to create a web application. For example, I'll click on this button and I will type here, for example, web. Then you can see one Spring Boot starter web dependency will be included. Build a web including RESTful applications and a user Tomcat as a default embedded server. For example, you want Thymeleaf, choose Thymeleaf. For example, I want security, or I want, for example, JPA. When I choose JPA, then since Spring Data JPA is a dependency, persist data in SQL stores with JPA using Spring Data and Hibernate. Just we click that, it is added. And here we choose web. For example, when I click that, web is added. If you don't want, you can delete. Then we click on generate button. one zip file will be downloaded. And we just unzip. So in that unzipped folder, we can see our project. We can import that project into our workspace, Eclipse workspace, or any other IDE workspace. This is a way how we kickstart the application using this tool. If it is STS IDE, no need to open this tool. STS internally connects with this tool for kickstarting our application development. Initially, the first thing we do like this. So hope you guys have identified about what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, guys, I think you got my point.
Sorry to interrupt you. Hello, Shekhar.
Yeah.
What is the difference? There is one option like we have to select one jar or var.
Yeah, yes.
What is the difference between jar and var?
By default, Spring Boot applications are packaged into jar files where you can directly run them with the Java command. So suppose if you want to deploy your Spring Boot application into some external server like a WebLogic or JBoss or something, so then you just choose the packaging type as var, so that when you build the application, when you package your application, a var file is created. That var file you can deploy on any other server, external servers.
Okay.
That is var is for deploying on external servers. If you want to run application by itself with the embedded server support, then jar.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. So guys, you might have understood about what I'm trying to tell you. Hope you guys have enjoyed the session. And somebody, yes, Sharma. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Sharma. Yeah, tell me.
Okay, so I have one small question. Like you said that Spring Boot application can be run through a jar or through var.
Yeah.
So if I say jar, like I have many dependency libraries which I'm using in my Spring Boot applications.
Yes.
And if there is one library which is not available in the POM, I mean, there is no entry for the POM for that. I mean, it's a third-party library, but there is no POM entry for that.
Yes. Yeah. Understood.
So if I want to run that Spring Boot application through jar command, Java jar command, how can I mean, can I easily provision that I can use that library in my Spring Boot jar, which I have exported it? Can I run it through the Java jar command?
I would like to tell you one thing. Suppose if that there is no POM entry, there is no group ID, artifact ID for that particular third-party library. There is one option I want to tell you is that you can just install it into your local repository, that is Maven local repository.
Okay.
And you can add that dependency into your pom.xml of your project.
Okay, so how can we install that into our
There is a command for that. Okay, mbn command is there, Maven command is there.
Okay.
Using that Maven command, we can provide a group ID, -d options are there. So we can provide a group ID, artifact ID, whether it is a jar or where, that we can just specify. It's a somewhat a lengthy command. You can check for that. For example, I'm correcting with some database for which the driver jar is not exist as a POM entry. Then what can I do now? What can I do now? I'll simply install it as my, I can install with a group ID, artifact ID into my local repository. Then I can use it into my pom.xml with a dependency tag. So
can you help me out how to search that Maven command for installing the third party?
For example, how to, you can simply say how to install OJDBC into Maven local repository. Like that, you can just type, you will get the answer.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So guys, we got something, and this is a very, very important session, guys. Hope you are enjoying the session. Lot of things I'll explain slowly when the sessions are started. Somebody, Devendra.
Yes,
Yeah, sure. Why not?
So in this course, whether the microservices
Yes, microservice, including microservice design patterns, Apache Kafka, okay, everything. I will cover including microservices design patterns as well. Version 2 of microservices, V2.
Okay. Also, do we create project in microservice? I mean,
Yes, that's what I said. When I start microservices, one application will take from beginning to ending. The same application will continue. And on that application only, all the microservice, the cloud features we are going to apply. And finally, we will just create them as Docker images. And we will just going to run them on AWS. That's it. Either AWS or Azure, anyone.
So what are the duration?
3 months. Yeah, duration you're asking, I think. I'm not exactly getting your voice, but still I can understand something. I think you're asking about the duration.
No. I'm asking what are the patterns we are going to include in this course?
I'm very sorry. Actually, I'm not able to clearly, and I some words I can able to hear, but remaining I'm just getting some.
what's the fees for that, Shekhar?
Yeah, you can just those. If anybody is asking about such things, please contact our admin after the session now. So they will give you full details of this, like whether you want any backup videos or whether just only class is sufficient. So based on that, there will be something. You please contact our admin so that you will get more details on that.
So is there any contact details for the admin person?
Just please go ahead to ashokitech.com so you can find.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Devendra, you said about what are the design patterns that we are going to cover. Okay, almost all the microservices design patterns. I told already circuit breaker pattern we are going to cover, Saga pattern we are going to cover. A lot of patterns will come at that time in microservices. Devendra.
Hi Shekhar, this is Venkatesh.
Yeah, sure.
Hello. Hi Shekhar.
Yeah.
This is Venkatesh.
Yeah, Venkatesh. Yeah.
Yeah. From 2 days I'm attending your demo session yesterday and day before yesterday and today.
Okay.
And I was a fresher. I have good knowledge on core Java and SQL.
Yeah, sure.
So I was not. I had no idea on Springboot.
Have an
Spring
idea in
Framework.
Spring? Earlier idea in Spring, and on Spring, do you have some idea?
I was recently passed out student and was recently joined in MNC company.
Okay.
So I was not idea about the Springboot and Springboot framework as well.
No, Spring Boot is okay, but Spring Framework, I'm asking about Spring core knowledge is also required.
No, I didn't have knowledge. I have only on core Java, a little bit knowledge on JDBC and SQL.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I'm little bit.
So this is what I said. Spring core knowledge is must. So anyhow, you just do one thing. By next, we are going to start with some of the Spring core concepts. I'm going to tell.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to teach some Spring core concepts, like some annotations which we use completely throughout the applications in Springboard that everybody should know. I'll recap them. So, but you need to do some additional hard work so that you can cope up with the sessions.
Yeah, already I have contacted the institute members. So they said that once ask to trainer only.
Okay.
So otherwise they said that join in the advanced batch. They said.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Which is best?
The thing is, what I'm trying to say is, if you are okay that you can learn quickly with a Spring core, try to get Spring core knowledge within this weekend. Say, for example, next we have session on Monday. Okay. So from next coming Monday, I'll take the sessions regularly from Monday to Saturday. This is the first week, so I'm not taking any session, but generally the sessions will be from Monday to Saturday. And this week you just go through some Spring core knowledge. Okay. Spring core knowledge if you go through, then what is dependency injection, Spring container, setter and constructor injections, auto wiring.
Okay.
So these things, 4 or 5 topics, if you prefer, if you, for example, prepared well, then you can easily cope up.
Okay, Shekhar.
Yeah, hi Shekhar. This is Sabya Saji. Actually, I'm working in Cognizant as an experienced guy.
Yeah.
So even I'm also looking for switching the project. So is this class sufficient for switching project?
Yeah, definitely. I can give you 100% guarantee assurance. Okay.
Same timing.
Same timing is same timing. 8 to 9.
Shekhar, all the notes will be get provided, right?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
All the notes will be get provided.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.